Hi everyone, David Aragona and Mike Beer here taking a look at the DRF Friday race of the day. It is race 9 at Saratoga, the Grade 1 Belmont Derby Invitational. This one for the 3-year-olds on the turf. This year shortened from its typical distance, 1.25 miles at Belmont. They ran at 1.316 at Aqueduct this year. With it being at Saratoga in 2025, it's going to be carded at the 1.125 distance, which does open it up to some more 3-year-olds who have been competing in the top races, like the American Turf, which is going a 16th of a mile shorter than this. So we've got some horses coming from that race, but also, Mike, a European shipper coming in here, some horses that are switching back to turf, exiting dirt races, including 2 out of the Kentucky Derby. So an interesting mix of runners in this Belmont Derby.
Yeah, agreed. And a few horses too that it feels like we haven't seen their best race yet, at least on this surface. So that makes it even more interesting. Obviously when they extended it out to the 1.25 miles, they were hoping to get more Europeans. We got a couple that with European form in here though, and I think they're both pretty interesting.
With this being the race of the day, do note you can get free past performances for this race. Just create a free account at DRF.com. Head on over to that race of the day page, and you can access free classic, formulate, or Timeform US past performances to handicap along with Mike and me. And speaking of those Timeform US past performances, let's check out the Timeform US pace projector for this Belmont Derby. These races, Mike, always a little tough to read the turf routes because jockey intention matters so much. But I do agree with this pace projector that you would imagine, especially drawing the rail, the number 1 Tank is going to go to the front because really his only chance to win this race is to try to slow the pace down on the lead.
Yeah, and he might not have to go fast either in this race, Dave. I don't see a ton of pace in here. He seems like the likeliest horse to just go to the front and see how far he can take them. It's a tough spot for him, but maybe he gets the right trip.
You will notice that the number 3 Luther not shown on this pace projector. We have no data on him with all of his races coming overseas, but it does seem like he's a horse that wants to launch from towards the back of the pack watching his prior races. Let's go through this field from the rail out, beginning with the horse we were just talking about who could be leading the field early, the number 1 Tank. We'll take a look at his most recent start in the Not Surprising at Gulfstream Park. And Mike, these races at Gulfstream on the turf as you head out of the championship meet into April, May, and June, they always get a little bit weaker. And it feels like he's been beating up on much softer competition than he's going to be meeting here. But this is a visually impressive victory last time. It's certainly a convincing win when you watch it. But I'm always a little bit skeptical of horses that are able to carry their speed on that Gulfstream Park turf course as they try to go elsewhere. And maybe turf courses aren't quite as conducive to early types trying to sustain that speed.
Yeah, he's still, listen, this horse has won 3 stakes races in a row. He's still got an awful lot to prove. I understand why they want to step him up now and test him against some better horses to see what they have. He seems like he's in pretty tough here, even with what might be a pace advantage.
The lone Chad Brown representative in this race is the number 2 early adopter, and this is a race that's been a bit of a bugaboo for Chad Brown. I don't think he's ever won it, despite having multiple winners of the Belmont Oaks, the female counterpart. And Mike, this horse certainly can get the distance. 1.125 seems like it's no problem. He won going the 1.316 at Keeneland 2 back with a big late run to defeat allowance foes, but I was pretty disappointed in his last race in the Audubon, where it felt like he was competitive with that field on paper and just never really got a late rally going. Maybe he didn't love the Churchill Downs turf course, but he's going to have to run way better than that to beat this field.
Yeah, I agree. His form's pretty spotty. There are a couple of good races, but for the most part, I would say he's been a little bit disappointing. And that was certainly the case last time. I don't know what the excuse you would want to make for him there. He didn't break that sharply from the gate, but after that, I just thought Pratt had him in a good position. He was right behind the winner of that race as they came into the stretch, and he just didn't really kick that hard.
Pretty intriguing new face in this race is the number 3 Luther, who's coming over from his home base in Great Britain to contest this Belmont Derby against the American-based runners. And Mike, I like some of this horse's races, especially going back to his 2-year-old season. I know it was just a 3-horse field, but he was right there with New Century, who we'll get to in just a little bit, one of the favorites in this race when he made it the second start of his career in the Stonehenge during his 2-year-old season. Came off the layoff in a synthetic race this spring in April, and he was second to a pretty good horse in Detain. You can see just in this horse's past performances, Detain came back to finish 3rd in the Prix de Jockey Club, a Group 1 event in France last time, where Luther was way farther back in the pack. But I think he was a little bit exposed regarding his stamina that day, Mike, because Luther was a bit closer to the pace than he's accustomed to running and just couldn't really kick through the late stages. I did like his race prior to that in the French 2000 Guineas, where again, he had to be used early more so than he had in a lot of his prior races to get over from post 15 of 16. He was drawn very wide and had to get over from that post and was still kicking on through the late stages to hold his own against some good horses like Henri Matisse and Camille Pissarro, some of the top runners in the Aidan O'Brien barn overseas. So I think on class, he certainly fits against this field.
Yeah, I didn't hate his race 2 starts back either. I thought that was an okay performance. I mean, it still just felt to me like, as far as grade 1 competition goes, at least over in France at this stage of the game, you just can't go with those horses. He just could not finish with them. And then he was, obviously a lot worse last time with a little bit more distance attached. So, we'll see how far he ultimately wants to go. I'm with you. I felt like he ran some really nice races as a 2-year-old. And I'm trying not to be too hard on him for the 2 Group 1 races recently. He's probably a much better fit in this race.
Yeah, they've just been really ambitious since coming back for his 3-year-old season, and this seems like it's a pretty good spot for him. The number 4, New Century, the horse that actually beat the one we just talked about during their 2-year-old season, he's come over to the North America a few times, won the Grade 1 Summer last year up in Canada, before running respectable 4th in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, came back to the U.S. last time for the American Turf, the Grade 1 event at Churchill Downs. And Mike, I'm interested to know what you think of that trip, because he was pretty far back early on the race, but boy, was he flying through the late stages to just miss getting up for second.
Yeah, I just don't think it really worked out for him there. They just sort of, rated him to the back of the pack there, and he was unable to. The worst part about the trip to me, David, was he was just unable to improve his position around the final turn. He just could never really get himself into range of the leaders, and then by the time he got that split in the stretch to get clear, it was just way too late. But thought he finished really well in there. His only other start this year looks like a disappointing performance in the Craven. I just thought he had a terrible trip in that race. I mean, he's just hung out to dry the entire mile in there against Field of Gold. To me, I don't think you're supposed to be too hard on him for that. And I liked most of his races as a 2-year-old as well. This horse makes a lot of sense in here.
Yeah, when you watch some of his overseas races, it feels like he's got more tactical speed than they've used when he's run over here. So I wonder where he could be placed early in this race that doesn't feature a whole lot of pace. The number 5, Test Score, had much better early position than New Century in the American Turf last time. And he was asked from a long way out, Mike, and it kind of looked like he was spinning his wheels in upper stretch, but he is sort of a grinding type. He doesn't have that big turn of foot like New Century possesses. And he kept grinding on to the finish, was actually able to hold off New Century as both were reeling in Zulu Kingdom late in that race. Kind of feels like the 9 furlongs is going to be just fine for this horse. A little added distance might actually help Test Score a little bit. And I just like all of his races. He's very consistent.
Me too. I like him as a horse. I think he's run well in every one of his starts, and your point's well taken. But he doesn't have that acceleration that maybe you would like to see from a top turf horse, but he just stays. And, obviously that lack of acceleration has cost him a couple of times. He's had some really tough trips in his races, but if he's in the clear in the stretch with a shot at it, he will keep coming after it. This horse is good, and he can win this race.
I think a horse that you kind of have to make a hard decision about in this race, Mike, is the number 6, Final Gambit, who's going to be a polarizing horse in here. I kind of didn't even know what to do with him on the morning line. I ultimately made him the lukewarm favorite at 5-2 because he does have that form from the Kentucky Derby, which a lot of bettors will be familiar with, finishing 4th to a crop that seems like it's pretty good. Horse like Sovereignty, Journalism, and Baeza. So the Kentucky Derby, a very strong performance. And if he can repeat that here, he's going to be awfully tough to beat. But the big question mark with this horse is the surface switch going back to turf. And I understand why they're now trying to make him into a turf horse, because he's got that very good synthetic form, just kept improving. His races at Turfway over the winter was so visually impressive in the Jeff Ruby Stakes, but it's not always so clear that synth form is going to go back to one of the other surfaces. And I think this horse still has plenty to prove on the turf.
I'm not going to disagree with any of that. And I feel like taking a short price on him, may not be the right thing to do here. Personally speaking, and I know that he ran really well in the Derby to finish 4th in there from way back in the pack. I'm glad they're making a surface switch with this horse. I don't think he's a dirt horse. I think he is going to ultimately be a turf horse. And I know the form is on the all weather, but this horse, he's got 1 turf start. It was his career debut. He ran really well in that race, I thought. And I've been waiting for them to switch surfaces with this horse, and I'm glad they're finally doing it. Doesn't mean I want to bet him, in a Grade 1 race.
Yeah, when I went back to watch that turf race, it was better than I remembered. He closed very strongly into a pretty slow pace that day, so he clearly handles the surface. I did find this interesting DRF formulator fact for Brad Cox, though. And Mike, it's really tough to find significantly negative stats for Brad Cox. He just does everything well across the board, but in a pretty large sample, going from dirt to turf with horses that are not maiden, so making this dirt to turf switch a little bit later in their careers. Over the past 5 years, 14 for 118. That's just a 12% win rate with a 70-cent ROI. And I actually parsed this down to just stakes horses. He's 4 for 37 in stakes doing this with a 64-cent ROI. So not great stats for Brad Cox, and just something to be aware of with a horse that could be a short price in here. Number 7, World Beater, is a horse that's coming off 2 of the best performances of his career, both going this 9 furlong distance at Churchill Downs, coming right off a maiden win, stepped up against Stakes Company last time and won the Audubon. Mike, he got an absolutely perfect trip in that race, was able to save ground early, tipped into the 2 path and the 3 path, and wore that field down to get the job done. Just feels like this is a tougher spot.
Yeah, gonna step him up. In other words, they're gonna step him up and test him against some better horses to see what they have. His last 2 races are good. I thought he got perfect trips in both of them. A pretty hard bobble at the start of the maiden win. 2 starts back, but after that, he got good position and finished really well in there. Going this distance, sort of the same thing last time. Really good trip, good finish to close it down. Source is okay. This is a tough spot.
Horse that I was kind of torn about handicapping this race is the number 8 Flying Mohawk, because Mike, we've done some previews together where we've talked about him. He hasn't run, and I've liked him in those races. Now he's landing in a pretty tough spot, this grade 1 event, as he does get back to the turf. And I really like this horse getting back to the turf because he's got that proven turf form from over the winter. A couple of races, one at Churchill and at Fairgrounds, where he was a visually impressive winner, one of them beating a horse that I know you have some affinity for, States Rights, at the Fairgrounds, and actually ran just fine over the synthetic course in the Jeff Ruby Stakes. Clearly, he didn't handle dirt at all in the Kentucky Derby, and they're getting back into the right spot on the right surface. I don't love the outside post, though, especially in a race where it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of pace, and this field could be pretty compact early.
Yeah, I listen to me. I agree with all that stuff, but I do think he's a horse that I wanted to keep open in here because you're not supposed to hold the Derby against him. The race 2 back on the all weather, he ran fine in there. He was, not as good as Final Gambit, but he ran pretty well in his own right in that race. And his 2 turf races before that, they're both really good, and he's finally getting back to the right surface here.
Let's go to picks for this Friday race, the day of the Belmont Derby. And Mike, for me, I was either going to put Flying Mohawk on top or Luther on top. And I know it doesn't look like that because I put Flying Mohawk in 4th, but I do have respect for both of those horses coming out of the American turf. I didn't want to downgrade them too much. Just thought Luther was going to get the right kind of trip, saving ground in this race. He's got a big turn of foot, or at least he showed it during his 2-year-old season. They can get him held up early and produce him in the stretch. I think he might have the turn of foot at this distance over an American style course to run these horses down. And I think he fits on class. So I put the number 3 Luther on top, but you're going to go to New Century.
Yeah, I got Luther in there as well. I thought about putting him on top myself, Dave. I ultimately decided to go with New Century. I just trust him a little bit more. I'm hoping he can get a better trip in this race than he was able to pull last time. I think this horse is pretty good. I like all of his races, so I'm going to take him. And I see you have Tescore in there as well. I really respect him. I think he's going to run well in here, and he's a horse I definitely want to use.
4, 5, 6, 3 for Mike, and 3, 5, 4, 8 for me in the DRF Friday race of the day, race 9 at Saratoga, the grade 1 Belmont Derby Invitational. Good luck if you're playing the races later this week.